Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this epic time chamber series. My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like, join the Patreon, and subscribe to the page. Also, leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin.
Cross my heart and hope to die. Welcome to my dark side.
In an instant, like a bolt of lightning, Mephistopheles descended from the sky onto Champa's planet, as if he had simply walked out of the air itself. The impact of his arrival sent shockwaves through the atmosphere. His divine ki, dark and oppressive, pressed against everything around him like a suffocating weight. It was unlike anything anyone had ever felt before. Everyone sprang to their feet, alarmed. The sheer power of his presence was enough to make the bravest warriors tremble. Even Champa, the god of destruction, knew this wasn't just any visitor. This energy, he recognized its nature. After all, he had seen something similar before, though never at this magnitude. Mephistopheles' ki was suffused with destruction, but this was on a level Champa had never imagined. It was raw, dangerous, and relentless. The ground beneath Mephistopheles' feet began to crack and crumble, as if the very planet was being hockeyed just by his presence. Hit, the universe's most notorious assassin, narrowed his eyes. His body tensed as he instinctively raised his guard. He didn't need to wait for Mephistopheles to make a move. The killer intent was already radiating from him like a death sentence. Hit wasn't going to underestimate this new arrival, not for a second. Without hesitation, Kale and Caulifla, the two Saiyan warriors, locked eyes and understood immediately. They had to fuse. The energy pouring off Mephistopheles was more than either could handle alone. In a flash of energy, they merged into Kefla. The fusion gave them a fighting chance, but even then, the tension in the air was undeniable. Silence gripped the space as all eyes turned toward Lord Champa. He was healed, but the question remained, could he stand against such a force? Champa's mind raced as he stared down the invader. He could feel it, an energy disturbingly close to that of Vegeta's, but darker, more twisted in nature, and undeniably stronger. This being Mephistopheles. He wasn't just a threat, he was power incarnate, something beyond destruction itself. Champa shuddered at the thought, wondering if even his brother, Beerus, could hold his own against this creature. Kaba, the weakest of the group, gritted his teeth. He knew his chances, but he refused to back down. With a burst of energy, he transformed into his Super Saiyan 2 form, determination shining in his eyes. If this was the end, then he wouldn't go down without a fight. Outside the palace, Mephistopheles moved slowly, purposefully, savoring the fear in the air. His arm hung casually at his side, and a cold, satisfied grin stretched across his face. With each step closer to the palace, the tension mounted. When he reached the massive structure, he casually extended his hand, fingertips brushing the wall. "Hakai!" he roared, his voice booming like thunder. In an instant, the palace began to disintegrate, crumbling to dust as if it had never existed. The destruction was absolute. Within seconds, the mighty structure was gone, leaving nothing but the four warriors standing, their gazes locked on the threat before them. Mephistopheles' eyes gleamed with malice as he addressed them. "It's in your best interest to come with me as a false demon," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "I'd like to run some tests on you. Be a good boy and become my test subject." Champa blinked in disbelief. "Huh?" he muttered, taken aback. "Is he talking to me?" His confusion quickly turned to anger as he processed the threat. He clenched his fists, turning his attention fully to Mephistopheles. He took a deep breath before speaking up. "I don't know why you chose to come to this place," Champa growled, his voice filled with simmering fury. "But let me be the first to tell you that you are not invited. If you don't know what's good for you, you should turn around and leave before I get angry." Mephistopheles chuckled darkly, the sound echoing ominously in the ruined space. His arms stretched out wide, fingers splayed as if he were holding someone invisible by the throat. Then, in a chilling voice, he commanded, "Come to me." In the blink of an eye, as though pulled by an unseen force, Lord Champa found himself yanked forward, his neck firmly caught in Mephistopheles' iron grip. He hadn't even had a chance to react, his power meaning nothing in the face of this monstrous foe. Hit, standing off to the side, knew he had to act quickly. Time itself was his ally, and he wasn't about to waste it. Activating his time skip technique, he jumped half a second into the future, freezing the world around him. Everything stopped, or so he thought. Hit's eyes widened in disbelief as he noticed something impossible. Mephistopheles' eyes were moving, following his every move despite time being frozen. How could this be? No one should be able to see him within the time skip. And yet, Mephistopheles grinned. His eyes locked on Hit. Hit was frozen for a moment, completely paralyzed by shock. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. For a second, it was as if a part of himself had separated, moving within his time skip. He was used to this, moving through a space where time stood still, but no one, not even Goku, had been able to react during his time skip. Goku could predict where Hit would be. Yes, he had done it before, timing his reactions perfectly for when Hit stepped out of the skip to land his attack. But even Goku had to wait. He couldn't move while time itself was frozen. Yet somehow, Mephistopheles had done the impossible. Hit's time skip shattered, the still dimension he controlled crumbling like broken glass. The world around him resumed its flow, but something was terribly wrong. "How can this be?" Hit shouted, his voice filled with disbelief as he stared at Mephistopheles. His fists clenched and his eyes narrowed in confusion. No one could break his time skip. No one was supposed to be able to. Above, Champa, the god of destruction, was still gripped tightly by Mephistopheles. But the enormous purple cat wasn't about to give up. With a burst of rage, Champa summoned 2 massive orbs of destructive energy. The deadly spheres glowed with raw godly power as he slammed them into both sides of Mephistopheles' head. The demon god's grip loosened. Champa wasn't finished. He spun in the air with surprising agility, delivering a sharp kick to the side of Mephistopheles' face, sending the demon god flying. The impact was so intense that Mephistopheles crashed into a massive mountain, shattering the rock structure on the distant planet's surface. "Lord Champa, are you all right?" Kaba, the young sign warrior, called out as he rushed to his god's side, worry etched on his face. Champa landed with a heavy thud, dust swirling around his feet. He panted, his eyes darting around as he tried to gather himself. Something was off. Something was deeply wrong. His strength, it was draining, slipping away like water through his fingers. A huge chunk of his power had vanished. He wasn't at full capacity anymore, and he knew it immediately. "Hey, Hit!" Champa's voice was rough, barely containing his frustration. "What happened a while ago? Did he stop your time skip attack?" Hit, who was still standing frozen in place, snapped out of his daze. His usually calm demeanor was shaken. "Yes, my lord, but that shouldn't be possible. He didn't predict my movements like Goku did before. It was something else entirely." He shook his head, his brow furrowed. "I just can't figure it out." Before they could contemplate further, a deep, chilling voice echoed across the battlefield, rumbling from the mountain rubble. Mephistopheles emerged from the dust, standing tall and unharmed. In fact, he looked stronger than ever, as if the blows he'd received had only made him more powerful. "It's quite simple, really," Mephistopheles said, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "Isn't it obvious? I too can time skip." Hit's eyes widened, and Champa growled under his breath. How could this be? "You see," Mephistopheles continued, stepping forward with a sinister grin. "The demon gods were the originators of time skip. After the Great War, the ability was thought to be lost to history. But time skip wasn't an exclusive technique. Only certain races possessed the unique trait necessary to use it. And as it turns out, Hit, your race just happens to be one of the few capable of wielding that power." Hit gritted his teeth. Realization dawned on him. This was bigger than he had thought. Mephistopheles' voice deepened, the air around him growing heavier as he spoke. "The real reason time travel was banned across the universes isn't what you've been led to believe. Sure, there were reasons for it. Reasons you all know. But the true reason, the one kept secret, was to limit the demon race. We were growing too powerful, discovering ways to counter the angels, with techniques like dark siphoning, and yes, time skip." Kaba's eyes darted from Hit to Champa, then back to Mephistopheles. He was trying to process what he was hearing. "The Daishinkan," Mephistopheles said, uttering the name of the Grand Priest with a hint of venom, "saw how dangerous we were becoming. We were learning to fight back, finding ways to challenge the angels themselves. So he leveled the playing field by banning all time-related practices." Champa's fists clenched, and he took a step forward. "You're telling me the ban on time travel was all to stop your race? To keep the demons from gaining too much power? I've always thought that it was to stop people from messing with time." Mephistopheles chuckled darkly. "That's what they want. He wants you to believe. Let me give you a word of advice. I don't know why I am telling you all this since you all will die here today. But that grand priest, he's evil, I tell you. That priest takes pleasure in killing, then says it's all in the name of maintaining balance to the universe. A tense silence fell over the battlefield as the weight of Mephistopheles' words settled in. Hit could feel his blood boiling. Champa, despite his exhaustion, stood tall, glaring at Mephistopheles. I won't let you win, no matter how strong you think you are. Mephistopheles smirked, his dark eyes gleaming. We'll see about that. Mephistopheles smirked confidently, his voice cold and calm as he spoke. The reason I was able to shut down your time skip technique is simple. I can time skip much further than you can. His words hung in the air like a challenge as he casually stepped forward, closing the distance between himself, Champa, and Hit. His dark aura pulsed, radiating an overwhelming power. Hit scoffed, the disbelief evident on his face. He had never encountered anyone who could time skip like him, let alone someone who claimed to surpass his ability. The very idea was laughable. Let's test that theory, Hit shouted, his confidence returning as he prepared to show Mephistopheles just how wrong he was. Without another word, Hit activated his time skip once more, but this time he pushed further. Instead of the usual 0.3 of a second, he leapt forward 1.0 second into the future, something he had never done before. Ever since the Tournament of Power, Hit had been relentlessly training. He had honed his technique with one goal in mind: defeating Jiren, the warrior who had once mocked his time skip, calling it weak. That insult had driven Hit to surpass his limits, and now he was ready to prove just how strong he had become. But Hit wasn't done yet. He could sense that Mephistopheles was different, full of dangerous tricks. He couldn't afford to take any chances. Focusing harder, Hit pushed his limits even further, extending his time skip to 0.3 of a second. It was the furthest he had ever gone, deeper into the future than he ever thought possible. For a brief moment, everything around him stood still. Time itself was frozen, and Mephistopheles was caught in that frozen state. Hit allowed a rare smile to cross his usually stoic face. This time, he had him. Serves you right for underestimating me, Hit muttered under his breath. Without hesitation, Hit clenched his fist, preparing to deliver the final blow. His hand was aimed straight at the heart of the demon god, ready to end this once and for all. The feeling of triumph surged through him as he powered up for the attack. Die! Hit yelled, throwing his arm forward with all his strength, ready to plunge his fist through Mephistopheles' chest. However, something truly shocking occurred at that very moment. Hit, who had skipped 1 full second into the future, began to slow down. His movements, which should have been lightning fast, turned sluggish, almost turtle-like. It was as if someone had jumped even further into the future than him, causing his time skip, which was now his present, to decelerate. Hit's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. His eyes widened in disbelief, and his voice trembled as the realization hit him. Impossible! He managed to shout, though his words came out painfully slow, like they were being dragged through molasses. He was frozen in place, his body locked in mid-strike, his fist just inches from Mephistopheles' chest. The once unstoppable assassin now found himself helpless. His time skip, the ability that had made him one of the most feared fighters in the universe, was no longer under his control. Then, to Hit's utter horror, he saw Mephistopheles start to move. The demon god, who had been frozen in time a moment ago, was now shifting, his body coming back to life, while the roles between them were reversed. Hit, the master of time, was now the one trapped in the frozen moment. Mephistopheles had outdone him, skipping 3 full seconds into the future. It was a terrifying sight. Hit's future had become the past. The reality of it all crushed him. Mephistopheles had turned time itself against him. Suddenly, a sharp blow connected with Hit's chest. The pain exploded through him as Mephistopheles' hand pierced through his skin, digging into his left side. Hit's eyes widened even more as the demon god's voice rang out, cold and mocking. You wanted to take my heart? Mephistopheles sneered. Now, I'll take yours. With a ruthless yank, Mephistopheles pulled his arm back, gripping Hit's heart in his hand. The once beating organ, slick with blood, hung from his fist as he ripped it from Hit's chest. For Hit, the world stood still. His time skip had failed him. and now he was facing the ultimate consequence. In the blink of an eye, time resumed for everyone else. The battlefield returned to its normal pace, but for Hit, it was too late. The mighty assassin, the pride of Universe 6, lay dead on the ground, his body lifeless, his heart in the hands of Mephistopheles. He had been killed by his own technique. The others stared, their expressions a mix of confusion and horror. To them, it had all happened in an instant. One moment, Hit was there, attacking with all his might. The next, his heart had been ripped from his chest, and his body fell limp to the ground. "Hit!" Kaba screamed, his voice cracking as he rushed forward, unable to believe what he was seeing. The young Saiyan's eyes were wide with disbelief as he reached Hit's side. His ally, the greatest fighter of Universe 6, lay motionless. Kefla's fists clenched at her sides as she stared at Hit's cold, lifeless eyes. Her blood boiled with rage. The sight of his body laid out on the ground filled her with an uncontrollable fury. "How could you, you monster?" Kale's voice erupted with fury, her body trembling as the immense power of her rage began to overflow. Her eyes were alight with a deadly glow, and a fierce snarl formed on her lips. She clenched her fists tighter, and the air around her started to pulse violently. Kale's raw power surged, and it was clear she was no longer in control of her own emotions. The berserk side of her personality, the side that was driven by pure, unbridled rage, was now taking over. The ground beneath her feet quaked as a result of the intense power-up, and a blinding light engulfed her. Kefla's energy skyrocketed to levels that seemed to defy explanation. Their combined strength tore through the very fabric of the dimension they were in, making the realm in which Shampa's palace resided tremble as if the universe itself feared their might. Kefla's power kept climbing higher and higher, until, suddenly, she broke through a barrier she had never touched before. Her hair elongated and became more jagged, her brow ridges more pronounced. The air crackled with untamed energy as Kefla roared. She had transformed into Super Saiyan 3, the ultimate form of power she had never attained until now. Her aura flared wildly, radiating a destructive force that shook everything around her. Mephistopheles, the sinister being standing before her, merely tilted his head, observing this transformation with a curious yet amused expression. His lips curled into a wicked grin, the corners of his mouth stretching unnaturally far. "Oh?" he murmured, a hint of surprise in his voice. This mortal, no, this sane warrior, was now wielding power that could rival the gods themselves. The thought intrigued him. Before he could dwell on it any further, Kefla vanished. Her speed was so immense that she became nothing more than a blur, untraceable by normal senses. In an instant, she was on him, her fist rearing back with enough force to obliterate planets. Mephistopheles' grin widened, just as Kaba, having transformed into his perfected Super Saiyan 2 form, appeared beside her. The young warrior's energy burned brightly, his aura flickering with a vibrant intensity. He too had been training tirelessly, honing his strength, and now the fruits of his labor were on full display. Without a word, the two Saiyans launched their attack, coming in from both sides at blinding speed. The air around them distorted, and the ground beneath cracked under the pressure of their combined energy. Kaba and Kefla moved in perfect synchronization, their bodies blurring as they struck with all their might. Mephistopheles glanced sideways, his eyes catching the movements of both fighters in that split second. He didn't flinch. As their fists rocketed toward him, he raised his hands, palms outstretched. The clash was thunderous. Mephistopheles caught both of their punches, his fingers gripping their fists with ease. The shockwave from their combined force rippled through the atmosphere, causing Champa's small planet to tremble as if caught in a cataclysmic storm. But the power behind their blows was immense, far greater than he anticipated. Mephistopheles' feet left the ground, his body pushed back by the raw force of the Saiyan's assault. The ground beneath them cracked and split open, and in the next moment, Mephistopheles was hurled through the air. His body crashed violently into the planet's surface, creating a massive crater as he skidded across the terrain like a comet striking from space. "Don't let up!" Kaba shouted, his eyes fierce with determination. He shot forward, his aura blazing a trail of golden light behind him. Kefla followed suit, her energy swirling like a cyclone as she propelled herself at the demon. Mephistopheles growled, digging his claws into the ground to halt his momentum. He looked up just in time to see the two Saiyans descending on him again, their combined energies blazing like twin suns. But before they could make contact, a shadow loomed overhead. Lord Champa, the god of destruction, dropped from the sky, his massive form descending with a power that felt like the weight of the entire universe. He landed directly on top of Mephistopheles, the impact causing a shockwave that shook the planet to its core. The force was so tremendous that it drove the demon deep into the planet's mantle, his body burrowing through rock and magma as he plummeted. The planet shuddered under the strain, cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and then, in a deafening explosion of light and sound, the entire planet began to break apart. The power of the explosion was like nothing seen before, an eruption of energy that sent shockwaves rippling through the fabric of space itself. But just moments before the explosion, Champa did something that left everyone stunned. The god extended his hands, creating a protective barrier of energy around the two Saiyans. With a grunt of effort, he hurled them away from the disintegrating planet, sending them hurtling through space toward the nearest celestial body. Without a second thought, Champa leaped off the crumbling surface and followed them, his body darting through the vacuum of space like a streak of purple light. The planet behind them exploded in a blinding flash, the blast wave expanding outward. It was an incredible feat, one that would be hard to believe if not seen with one's own eyes. Yet Champa had done it. For the first time, the god of destruction had acted selflessly, sacrificing his own safety to protect the Saiyans in the midst of battle. The Saiyans' bodies hit the ground with a thunderous crash, carving a massive crater into the surface of the planet. Debris flew everywhere, scattering into the air as dust clouds rose from the impact site. Kefla groaned as she slowly stood up, shaking off the shock of their sudden landing. Kaba rolled onto his back, gasping for breath, his entire body sore from the crash. He glanced around, blinking in confusion. "We're alive?" Kaba panted, looking up at the sky as the smoke began to clear. His heart was still racing. After an explosion like that, he had expected to be vaporized. Yet here they were, bruised but very much alive. Champa, the god of destruction, landed a moment later, his plump frame descending with surprising grace as he touched down beside them. His face was stern, and his usually lazy eyes were sharp with resolve. The ground trembled slightly under the weight of his energy. "You could have given us a warning before throwing us like that, Lord Champa," Kaba grumbled, pushing himself to his feet and dusting off his armor. "Shut up and stay on guard," Champa snapped, his gaze fixed upward on the remnants of his now destroyed planet. "An attack like that won't be enough to kill him." His voice was low and tense, a seriousness that Kaba had rarely heard before. For Champa, that was saying a lot. Kaba glanced up at the sky, following the god's gaze. Bits of the destroyed planet still glowed in the dark void, casting an eerie light across the surface of their new location. "Where are we?" he asked, looking around at the icy blue terrain. "This is planet Neptune," Champa muttered, not taking his eyes off the sky. "Home of the Ice Djinn. It's where Frost, one of your Universe 6 friends from the Tournament of Power, was born." The mention of Frost sent a shiver down Kaba's spine. He knew Frost was a deceiver, but now wasn't the time to think about that. Kaba opened his mouth to respond, but before he could utter another word, a terrible sensation washed over him. It felt as if his body was frozen in place, his blood turning to ice. He looked down and saw a crimson line form across his chest. His eyes widened in horror as he tried to speak, but no sound came out. A second later, his head slid off his shoulders, severed cleanly from his body. The world seemed to slow down as Kaba's lifeless body fell to the ground. Blood splattered onto the icy surface, steaming as it touched the cold terrain. Kefla let out a scream of pure shock and rage as she stared at Kaba's head rolling on the ground, his eyes staring blankly into nothingness. Standing behind where Kaba had been was Mephistopheles, his smile twisted and malicious. His arm was raised, and the blade-like edge of his hand glistened with fresh blood. "That was almost too easy," he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Champa's eyes went wide, his breath catching in his throat. "What? How? He's too fast. Was that time skip?" He muttered in disbelief, staring at Kaba's headless body sprawled across the icy ground. But he didn't have time to process the loss. Mephistopheles had moved at a speed even Champa hadn't been able to fully perceive. Without a moment's hesitation, the demon turned his attention to Kefla. His eyes narrowed as he activated his time skip technique, bending reality around him as he moved 3 seconds into the future. To him, everything seemed to slow down, the world a frozen tableau. Kefla stood motionless, her face twisted in fury and shock. But she couldn't move, couldn't even think. Mephistopheles grinned, savoring his moment of power. 3 seconds is more than enough to finish you off, he murmured. He took a step forward, raising his hand to strike. But then, something unexpected happened. A massive hand reached out of nowhere, grabbing Mephistopheles by the throat and yanking him back through the folds of time. The demon's eyes widened in shock as he was forcefully dragged back into the present. The next thing he knew, his body was slammed into the ground with enough force to create a crater around him. Blood spewed from his mouth as he gasped for breath. Champa towered over him, his face contorted with rage. "I'm not letting you surprise me again, you bastard," Champa snarled. His aura flared violently, the sheer power of it making the air crackle and distort. He wasn't holding back, not anymore. The god didn't give Mephistopheles a chance to recover. He unleashed a rapid barrage of blows, his fists moving faster than the eye could see. Each punch landed with the force of a planet, shaking the very foundations of planet Neptune. The ground buckled and cracked under the impact, shockwaves spreading out and causing the entire planet to tremble. Kefla staggered back, struggling to keep her balance as the surface beneath her feet shifted and quaked. The two combatants clashed with such intensity that the very orbit of the planet was disrupted. Planet Neptune shifted, thrown off its path by the sheer force of their battle. For a moment, it seemed as if the planet itself would tear apart under the strain, but somehow it stabilized, snapping back into place. Champa, his chest heaving with exertion, leapt into the sky, his massive frame surprisingly agile. With a roar, he began to summon energy from all across Universe 6. The ground below him shook violently, as an enormous sphere of energy began to form above his head. It pulsed with a sinister, violet glow. The Hakai energy, the power to destroy anything in existence. But this time, it was different. Champa's sphere kept growing, expanding far beyond its usual size, until it was larger than the planet itself. He was drawing in negative energy from every corner of the universe. Hate, pain, jealousy, and every dark emotion that mortals felt. The energy sphere crackled with a malevolent force, swirling with a power that was terrifying to behold. "Mephistopheles!" Champa roared, his voice echoing across the planet. "This is your end!" With a final cry, Champa hurled the massive sphere down toward the demon. It descended like a falling star, its terrible energy warping space around it. The planet's surface began to crumble under the sheer pressure of the attack. Mephistopheles lay on the ground, a twisted smile forming on his lips. "You really don't get it, do you?" he whispered, his voice eerily calm. He raised a single finger, pointing it toward the oncoming sphere of destruction. As the Hakai sphere made contact, something unimaginable happened. The immense ball of energy halted in midair, held back by just Mephistopheles' finger. He chuckled softly, the sound growing louder and more sinister by the second. "Hakai is my domain, you fool. How stupid of you to try and kill a primordial demon god with his own energy." He sneered up at Champa, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. With a single flick of his finger, Mephistopheles began to absorb the energy of the sphere. The Hakai energy, meant to erase anything it touched, flowed into him, disappearing into his body. Champa's eyes widened in horror as the sphere shrank smaller and smaller, its terrifying power being consumed by the demon. "This power belongs to me," Mephistopheles continued, his voice now brimming with new strength. "I don't know how a false god like you got your hands on it, but your imitation is pathetic." The last of the energy vanished into Mephistopheles, and he let out a satisfied sigh, flexing his arms as his aura flared brighter. "Thank you, Champa," he mocked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You've just increased your chances of death by 100%. And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoy the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.